Let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we are essentially popping the seal on a literal historical archive. What we're looking at here is a fully documented collision between two completely different ways of understanding the world. On one side, you have the rigid, authoritative framework of a judicial system, and on the other, the complex, highly mathematical logic of a physicist. The source material we're digging into today gives us this incredible front-row seat to a massive clash of paradigms, and it's all centered around one specific individual, Dr. Chen Jingyuan.
This code sets up the whole premise perfectly. Our source material is a document literally described by its author as a blood letter written entirely from inside a prison cell. But here's the fascinating part. Dr. Chen didn't write this as some standard legal appeal to persuade his judge. He intentionally framed it as a time capsule, a message left specifically for future readers. He really wanted to document exactly what happens when a state's legal framework tries to judge and quantify reality, while a scientist uses the literal laws of physics and mathematics to say, hey, what you're trying to do here is fundamentally impossible.
So, to really grasp this clash, we need to ground ourselves in the concrete facts of the case, and things moved lightning fast. Dr. Chen is a physicist, an independent scholar. In September 2022, he was arrested in a police raid at his home. By January 2023, official indictment. April, he was sentenced, and by May, his appeal was flat out rejected. The official charge? Picking quarrels and provoking trouble, which is a major criminal offense. And the specific action that triggered all of this? Using a VPN to occasionally retweet posts on a social media platform.
Now, we can clearly map out these two competing paradigms, and you'll see they are completely talking past each other throughout this entire ordeal. The judicial argument asserts that Chen knowingly spread false information online and that this directly caused severe public disorder. But then you look at Chen's scientific rebuttal, where he argues that what the court is alleging is quite literally a mathematical and epistemological impossibility. Neither side is even speaking the other's language.
Clash 1. Defining false information. Examining the collision over the very definition of truth. What exactly is a rumor?
According to the case documents, the court compiled a bunch of specific retweets as the core evidence of his crime. Chen takes these retweets and categorizes them into 4 distinct buckets. First, art and comics, like this Umbrella Girl drawing, which Chen argues are subjective aesthetics. They're inherently fictional, so you literally cannot label them true or false. Second, expressions of subjective emotion, like retweeting a picture of a candle. Third, theoretical articles and political critiques, which he frames as standard academic debate. And finally, historical facts, like old newspaper clippings, which he points out are falsifiable data that the authorities never officially debunked in the first place.
But the court, they saw this completely differently. The district court verdict states that public network space isn't outside the law, and they made a really crucial point about Chen's background. They argued that because the defendant has high academic credentials, he absolutely should be able to distinguish right from wrong. In the court's eyes, someone with a PhD simply must have known these specific posts were false and insulting to the political system. So to them, his retweets were a deliberate, knowing violation.
This is where Chen pulls out the heavy scientific artillery to counter that exact assumption. He brings in epistemology and Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Now, he argues that human knowledge actually has strict, provable limits. From a scientific standpoint, no logical system can be entirely complete and definitively true from within itself. So he's pointing out that requiring him to possess absolute truth about incredibly complex political or historical posts is just a fundamental misunderstanding of how knowledge actually works.
And this right here perfectly captures the total disconnect between the two sides. The court is dictating absolute, objective boundaries. This post is a rumor, that post is an insult, and a smart guy should know the difference. Chen, meanwhile, argues that art, human emotion, and philosophical debate completely lack scientific falsifiability. You can't just slap a scientific true or false label on a comic strip or a theory. The two systems are operating on entirely different definitions of reality.
Let's move on to our second major clash, network topology and measuring chaos.
100. According to the source documents, this was the absolute maximum number of followers Dr. Chen had on his social media account. And as he notes, a lot of those were likely inactive or just zombie accounts. He was not some mega influencer. Honestly, he was barely a participant.
Now contrast that with 20. That is the number of months Dr. Chen was sentenced to serve in prison for his actions. It's a massive, almost dizzying disparity, right? You have his actual, mathematically quantifiable network influence, fewer than 100 followers, 0 viral posts, stacked up against a severe 20-month criminal sentence for allegedly causing massive public disruption.
To defend himself against this charge of causing severe disorder, Chen introduces the scientific vocabulary of network topology. He explains that social media operates as what's called a scale-free network. In physics, this means you have a tiny number of massive hub nodes, think major news outlets or massive celebrities, and then you have millions of fringe nodes with almost zero connections. Chen categorizes his own account strictly as a harmless, isolated fringe node.
He then layers in another physics concept, self-organized criticality. Imagine a dynamic system that naturally evolves to a highly fragile state, kind of like a massive pile of sand. In that state, one tiny minor event, like dropping a single grain of sand, or in this case, a single retweet, could theoretically trigger a massive avalanche or system-wide collapse. This is basically the scientific equivalent of the legal claim that his small action caused massive societal chaos.
And this is where the frameworks violently collide over the actual data. The court legally asserts an avalanche of public disorder happened, but mathematically, Chen calculates that his average branching number, which is basically the number of people who saw and then reshared his posts, is less than 1. In fact, it was practically 0.
Let's walk through how Chen builds this into what he considers an airtight mathematical proof. He applies the Galton-Watson extinction theorem. Step 1, he has an edge node with no reach. Step 2, because nobody engages, his branching ratio is less than 1. Step 3, because that ratio is less than 1, the system remains in a subcritical state. Step 4, therefore, the probability of the information extinguishing or just completely dying out is exactly equal to 1, meaning, according to his model, it is statistically impossible for his actions to have triggered a system-wide avalanche. The severe disorder the court cited, he argues it simply cannot exist mathematically.
Section 3. The Historical Archive. A message to the future.
As we look at Dr. Chen's ultimate realization, we know his mathematical defenses obviously didn't change his 20-month sentence. The blood letter was written for us, the future observers. And summarizing the deep takeaways from this material, we see 3 core themes. First, the pure collision of state authority with scientific logic. How power defines truth differently than physics does. Second, the logical flaw of attributing massive system chaos to completely powerless fringe nodes. And third, it's a profound warning about the danger of any system denying the fundamental limits of human knowledge and demanding absolute truth where only subjective interpretation actually exists.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. In an increasingly complex world, how should societies handle the inevitable collision between the absolute declarations of state authority and the nuanced, provable limits of scientific truth? It's a huge question that Dr. Qin-Jing Yuan left for the future, and it's one we are absolutely going to have to figure out how to answer. Keep asking the hard questions. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.